I'm Albert Menkveld. I was trained as an econometrician, never had an idea of becoming a scientist. It was the 90s, the economy was booming, everybody went to work for these exciting companies. And so I was in that spirit, like I want to be part of that. And if you walk around the university in Europe, you feel like all the action is happening outside of the university, in industry in particular, since I was studying in Rotterdam. And so it was my dream to work for one of the top companies. And in fact, it was KLM that was at the very top where people wanted to work, the Dutch airline, KLM Royal Dutch Airlines. And so I became enchanted of working there as an econometrician. And there's a lot of mathematical challenges that you have when you run an airline. You need to figure out where to fly to, where to fly from, what the network is. But then once you have the network, you need to figure out what prices to charge so that you fill up the airline just to the last seat, because you don't want to fly half empty, nor do you want to overbook too much. And so you have to predict traffic, low-yielding traffic that books early, and you have to trade that off to late-booking traffic that is more business-related, is happy to pay a little more. But then so the challenge becomes to fill this flight up with low-yielding traffic and leave the seats for the predicted amount of high-yielding traffic. Now, those predictions is where the econometrician comes in. And all that was very exciting, and I joined the company. The other part was, of course, that you got to fly the world for almost nothing. I think it was 5% of the tickets, and you would travel in business class at particular management levels. So that was all fantastic, very appealing to me. So I started there. I was happy to get the opportunity. But then come a few months, a year, I felt like, oh, it's more of the same. I felt like it wasn't challenging my intellectual curiosity enough, and I started to feel like I want to do a PhD. Then I pitched to them to do a PhD in the revenue management, which is sort of what I just described, the challenge of making as much revenue out of the network as possible. And they liked it, but they were very slow to respond to my interest. And I felt like, they're slow to respond because they prefer for me to work in this position within the company and not really also do a PhD. And at some point I thought, like, the only way I can break this is to quit, to simply quit, go back to university, give up all the perks, like the flying around the world. I think all of us that started at the airline got a lease car and accept the lower salary again. And I simply quit and started a PhD at Erasmus University in Rotterdam. And I was feeling very happy about it because I was finally having the time and the freedom to pursue my curiosity. And so I started, and after a few months, KLM was on the phone asking if I wanted to talk about maybe a PhD position and a job at the firm. Now, this was the better position for me to be in, negotiating a position. So in the end, I got a better position. I became the spokesman, investor relations, to financial analysts, and that allowed me to have the time, because if you're a spokesperson for a company, there's the earnings announcements every quarter, super busy, like round the clock, including the weekends. In between, there's not much happening. And so the in-between period I could use to work on my PhD. And so that worked out much better than being inside the planning firm, the marketing department, et cetera, all the buzz about marketing. So that's where how I ended up doing a PhD and developing myself in that direction. And at the end of the PhD, I started to think, like, what do I want to do now? Do I want to go back to the airline, maybe at somewhat higher level in management, or maybe work at a bank or a consultant firm, or maybe start an academic career? And then actually the CFO at the time of KLM helped me to get into a US school, to spend some time there, and work with people there. This was Wharton that I visited on a Fulbright scholarship, actually, and Stanford, and that's where I got the spark. Like, wow, these are people that are fantastically good and super passionate about being an academic. And then I came back to Europe, and I thought, this is what I want to do. Now, if you're on a Fulbright, you have to come back. You have the 2-year homecoming requirement, because the spirit of Fulbright is an exchange between two countries. But the exchange meaning you have the scholar spend some time in the other country to come back enriched culturally, but also you followed the degree that you wanted. But you have to come back, because otherwise it doesn't work, right? The knowledge doesn't get transferred back to the country. So you have to come back 2 years. I took a position here at the Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam. They were very generous in terms of the research time I got here, because research really got me going. Teaching is, I find that fun, but not as much fun as research. And that's where I started my career. And look at me now. I'm 20 years, I think. 25 years. No, what is it? 22 years I'm here now, and I'm still enjoying it. It wasn't so much the topics. I mean, right from the first year of bachelor, I was interested in the material that I was offered, the books, the articles. It was the people and their excitement about, going beyond what was already out there, like getting excited about all the opportunities that were still out there for new knowledge to be generated, and that, to work with like-minded people that are so passionate about this activity of further developing your curiosity, asking yourself very ambitious questions, and then pursuing it, not alone, but with others, colleagues, co-authors, from whom you could learn a ton. That really is really a big part of the excitement of being an academic for me. Let's do it with a bird's eye. Let's get to 10,000 feet and fly real fast and see what did I do in those 20 plus years. As I said, I started out as an econometrician. I was very interested in the data, getting the signal, identifying the signal from the noise with appropriate econometric models, and see what these findings would tell us about theory. But theory, I did not understand so well, because although we had a world-class education in statistics and econometrics, we did not get lots of courses in theory. And so in my Fulbright years, I was not only working on my research, I was auditing classes at Wharton and at Stanford, shoring up my knowledge about theory, game theory, micro, macro, and I learned so much, and I became fascinated, and I wanted to learn more, because that theory enriches your experience of the data in a sense that you get to wear a pair of glasses and then look at the data in ways that you hadn't looked at it before, and then you start to learn things by wearing the pair of glasses that you never realized. And slowly I migrated to take theory so seriously as to test it on real data, or maybe one should say, first calibrate it, and in some instances you could actually test it if you believe the theory is close enough to the data generating process. And that's an exciting exercise, because when you get the theory to interact with the data will tell you what dimensions of the theory it fits, and so what forces are clearly at work in the world out there, but also in some dimensions it does not fit, and that's where it's telling you where the theory needs work, and that process is a process of generating knowledge, insights that you first get yourself. And then you have that conversation with yourself. It sounds weird, but those are the silent hours you spend behind your in your office behind your computer, or with noise canceling headphones on airports. You just sink into that model and the results that you don't understand, and that is many hours where the understanding starts, and you look again at the theory, you look again at the data. I don't do theory myself, but I've tried to find theorists who are interested in taking their theory to the data. But then I need to understand that language. I learned a great deal, for example, from Bojan Jovanovic, who is at NYU Econ, who I got to talk with when auditing his class, because in later years I went back to the US almost 10 years, mostly at NYU. First as a visiting scholar in Rob Engel's department, Robert Engel, the Nobel laureate. He was kind enough to host me for many years. And that makes sense, right? Because I was coming from an econometrics degree, but then I started following courses across the street in the econ department also, where there was a lot of theory. And Bojan Jovanovic was teaching us about industrial organization, and we talked about the industrial organization of markets and behavior on markets when people put a bid and ask quotes out to trade at. And then after class, he and I would talk about, I would ask questions where I always tried to convert what I heard to data that I actually got. And we started talking about what models could talk to these data, and ultimately we decided to write down a model specific to the types of questions I was interested in. And then Bojan developed this theory, and I took it to the data, and we spent many hours in his office thinking through what the most important driving forces could be that would drive people's behavior in securities markets. And I did have the data to see what the outcomes would be. And we learned a great deal from studying what the results were if you set up an economy in a particular way. Well, the other thing I learned is, sometimes theorists get stuck. They literally rip off that sheet from the flip over and start all anew, even though it took many months to develop and get at some point. But ultimately, this was a decade-long project. You get to something that's really exciting, that teaches you enough about what's in the data and why the data are the way they are. Like you can trace it all the way back to how particular types of agents behave. So that was a wonderful learning process. So I was starting out by saying, how did I get to where I am now from 20 years ago? And in summary, I started to learn the language of theory, work with theorists to have a richer picture of my data. And some people call this structural econometrics. That is super exciting. So that's where I am now. I don't think that is a scenario that is that's likely for a person like me, and maybe that's cultural baggage I have. But this is a country of facts. We like to. I mean, the French are dreamers, right? They imagine these beautiful models and ways the world works or should work, and but in Holland, the conversation very quickly turns to, okay, tell me, what's the fact? Okay, well, what are the facts? Why do you think the way you think? And to my mind, that's why econometrics is such a big discipline in this country. It started up with Jan Tinbergen, who was the first Nobel laureate in economics. He was working here taking structures or basically approaches that were developed in physics to economics, to understand cycles, but all trying to model the data. So it's very much based like, get me the facts, and you need statistics to tease out the signal from the noise, and so I think that's part of me. And I never will drift away from that. But the only thing I learned was that you can make so much more of the facts if you enrich them with theory. And this is why it's such a beautiful in some sense, almost a marriage when Dutch econometricians start to work with French theorists. And one of those projects I did was with Bruno Billet and many others in Toulouse. I think Bruno is now at, I should say, Paris, but we worked on Bitcoin. So what to make of Bitcoin. And let's start simple and see if we can understand with simple models, overlapping generations models, what Bitcoin is all about and why the data are the way they are on the pricing of Bitcoin. So no, it's very natural for me to come to this sort of heart of science from a data, through traveling the world of data. Other people, I'll meet there, other people have traveled the world of theory. Well, to give you an example is, so the project with Bojan Jovanovic, we have two papers. One we're still working on, the other is published in a journal Political Economy, where, and I can easily talk for an hour or more about this project alone, but if you're an economist, you understand in certain situations there might not be an equilibrium where agents play deterministic strategies, that they will always do the same thing. And this happens to be the case in our application. If you need to bid in a securities market, if you're bidding for a security, you either post a bid, which is an interest to buy, or an ask is an interest to sell, with an associated price. Now, the only friction that you have is that there's a tiny cost of putting that bid in the market. It's a very tiny cost, almost negligible, almost, because it's still costly. And this is where the very rich results start. Because in that situation, turns out that you can prove there's not a deterministic strategy. So everybody participating in the market, they would not do the same thing if they can't observe what others are doing. So it turns out there's the only way you get an equilibrium is in mixed strategies. So there's probabilistic bidding, and this turned out to sync very nicely with a pattern in the data that increasingly there seems to be erratic supply of liquidity. So there's a certain stochasticity. It's not liquidity is not deterministic. It's not always like this much offered at the bid and this much offered at the ask. Sometimes there's a lot, sometimes there's little, and but importantly, it's random. And that randomness is endogenously generated by the model, because the model is basically telling us, people can only rationally participate in this market through mixed strategies. And that's, I think, a very beautiful and powerful and pure finding that explains this erratic liquidity in markets. So that illustrates that idea. And this is the other exciting part about economics, as I like it, that you really want to have that all play out in your head, but then sort of imagine how that would relate to what's really out there, and you're asking the right question there, like how I mean, in some sense, this is noisy behavior. How can these people that get paid so much in the marketplace out there show noisy behavior? But it might come naturally, because they might switch their attention from one security to another, depending on where they think they can make money that day. It's quite natural for me to think that we cannot, and particularly if we talk about humans relative to machines, we cannot spend our attention at everything at the same time. I mean, there's so many securities, so many markets to follow, and they tick at such high speeds that it's impossible to do that. So you have to make choices. And it's also natural to me that for you to just look at, if it were a deterministic strategy, let's take this 10 securities or 100, and I'm going to spend all of my time there. sounds like a deterministic strategy, but it sounds like a losing strategy, because people will, you will miss opportunities elsewhere. So in some sense, the opportunity cost very high to specialize that way. And if you act in this deterministic way, then others might benefit from you, because you start to be showing predictable behavior for others, and they will prey on your behavior, and you might be driven out of the market, which is essentially the core of what the theory tells us. So it's not so unnatural to me to have mixed strategies play, even by humans, in securities markets. Yeah, I think this is the right way to think about it. A pure machine running a strategy. People think that, for example, high frequency trading is all about computers running the markets, but that's not really true. There's still a human setting the parameters of the machine, deciding to go by this strategy or that strategy. Of course, at low frequency, they will look at performance, by the hour, by the minute, maybe by the second, but that's still low frequency to a machine, because the machine ticks in microseconds. So there'll be a million or more decisions taken in a second. But then there's still a human monitoring at lower frequencies, because there might be contingencies in the market where you see the machine go out of control, and then you want to stop it or switch to another strategy. But so that's nothing that's coming down the road with generative AI or ChatGPT or whatever people call it these days. That's been happening already in the past decade or more even. It's always been ultimately a human using whatever technology was available at the time to enrich opportunities and to outsource some of the decisions. But ultimately, at low frequency, the human is in control. So if we think about generative AI or artificial intelligence, yes, ultimately the human is in control. But increasingly, decisions are being taken by the machine. And one very interesting aspect, which I think hasn't been exploited to the full extent yet, is that when we regulate markets, what we want to avoid is a collusion. That maybe many people are present in the market, and so you might have a feeling that we'll probably get good prices being an end user, so outside of this set of intermediaries. I think of them as market makers and then clients of market makers. In a human intermediate markets, everybody's standing on the floor. You understand what collusion means, because it basically we're all agreeing to have a bid-ask spread of a minimum size, so that we all go home with a decent amount of money being made. We really don't want to have tight spreads, because we're not earning much. And so there's this tension to come to agreements to not quote at a certain amounts. Think that you could quote within $1, just for the sake of example, within dollar prices, but we might agree to just quote at the integers, so that the distance is at minimum $1. And this is not ivory tower thinking. Something like this happened in the past, where it was a major scandal for the Nasdaq, where they found that indeed there was collusion on which prices to quote at. Anyways, it's very well understood what collusion is, but what if we migrate fast forward to a world where machines are calling the shots, and we don't really know what our algorithm is doing, but we do monitor whether it's making money or no. But the machine tries different things, and we sort of locked into this state where we find that on even minutes, I'm in the market quoting. On the odd minutes, it just happens to be that your machine is in the market quoting. This is a very extreme example, but hopefully it gets the point across. Then this is not a duopoly or a Bertrand competition on prices. It's essentially a monopoly, because I've decided to take the even minutes and you the odd minutes. and we're both making decent money, so we don't have any incentive to change to a different strategy. We like what the machine is doing. Now in this example, we know what the machine is doing, but the strategies might be very, very complicated. But then we're sort of colluding by the old definition, but we don't know because we don't fully understand what the machine is doing at the deepest level, like when it's trading at nanoseconds. And then you become, one starts to wonder, do regulators see this? Do we ever trace this down? And are we then responsible? Maybe the firms or the corporates and therefore the humans are responsible, but we then ask of them to understand what the machine is doing in all instances of the market at the deepest level of interaction with other machines. And I think that's very scary. And I do believe that at some point we'll lose that ability to still see what the machine is doing. That worries me. Yeah, and so you were asking earlier about 20 years of my academic career, and I told you about econometrics theory, etc. The other thing that I've told myself at some point is like I want to be more useful to society. I think as a junior academic, it's totally fine to follow your own interests. When you become more senior, you feel like I've gathered all this knowledge. Let's get it to work not only for the sake of understanding what's going out there, but let's get it to work for society. And then I was approached by the Dutch, let's call them the Dutch SEC, the Autoriteit Financiële Markten, to be on the Capital Market Committee, Kapitaalmarkt Commissie. And that was wonderful because we're a small committee of captains of industry, representatives of some governmental institutions and academics. And we talk about strategic issues hitting the regulator. And one contribution I feel proud about is that I've been consistently making the point that the more data we generate in the economy, the higher becomes the wish for regulators to collect it. And some of them, at least, underestimate the cost that these institutions have to produce the data for regulation. And sometimes they have to, multiple institutions have to deliver the data in a variety of ways. And anyway, it's a very costly process. And so there's increasingly complaints from industry about, I don't get to do my regular work. I have to just produce all these data. I have to hire people to clean the data and package in a way that the regulator wants. And so I wanted to create that awareness at the side of the regulator that you're asking so much from society. It's time for you to show what you're doing with the data. Produce something out of the data. Just not consume the data, produce something useful for society. And so long story short, I think that was one of the triggers why the AFM, so this is Dutch SEC here, started to have a state of the capital market. So every year they produce a small report with very basic trends about what's happening in the securities markets. And they give some interpretations of what's happening there. And that in and of itself, that document enriches the public debate on many issues that are going on in the market. Are the securities markets healthy? Are transaction costs going down? Is there enough IPO activity? If so, why? Or if not, why not? Et cetera, et cetera. So that starts to pull this data from all kind of institutions in society, but gives it back to society enriched with a perspective. And I think that is something that I feel is a good way for me as an academic to help produce value out of data for society. So this, I told myself I want to be more useful to society. So was approached by the AFM to be on the Kapitaalmarkt Commissie. I also started a blog because every time I release a paper, I put it in the public domain. But then I decided to also write a blog post based on it. Basically, get the main message across in a few paragraphs in plain language with the signature plot, so that people get if people that are not in finance get the punchline of the research. That's another way to be productive to society at large. The other thing I said to myself is I want to inspire the new generation. I mean, at some point you want to put to work what you learned yourself, or give back to what you learned yourself and make others benefit. And one way that when I was visiting the US, there is a 5-star conference, which is some of the best East Coast universities sent the best scholar a few years into a tenure at the local school to compete at the 5-star conference. Well, maybe not compete, but participate. It's quite an honor to be chosen to participate. And what that does is it creates an incentive at all of the local faculties to be the best and be the representative of the faculty at the 5-star conference. But it's also a way for these researchers to meet one another and to learn from one another, and in particular if they're from slightly different fields within finance. And I've sat in many of those conferences as I was visiting NYU. I was trying to participate in as much as I could, and this was one of the events that I really enjoyed participating in. When I came back to Europe, I thought that we should have something similar here, like create a network, and particularly younger researchers should meet one another and get inspired by one another. And that's when I started the 4 Nations Cup. And in essence, what that is 4 nations, different ones every year, sent their best 2 researchers, young researchers, to, I think, within 10 years of their PhD, I think, to do a mini seminar at a sort of short conference. It's a 1-day conference. So we have 4 slots of 2 presentations of about 50 minutes. It's mini seminars. It's emphasizing the fact that in a seminar, the audience can participate, so you get meaningful exchange of ideas. But I try, and every time I do something, I never like copy-paste. I want to bring it, give my own signature feature to it. And what Holland is good at is game shows. So I was just watching game shows. I thought, can we gamify this some and make it more exciting? And what we've done, I say we. I start with Thierry Foucault, but he at some point he dropped. What happens at the end of the day is the audience gets to vote on what they believe was the best country. We collect the votes, we count the votes, and then there's a winner. And there's a little bit of a cup and a moment of fame. You get the cup to win the 4 nations. And it creates an excitement throughout the day because there's something to be won. But it's all with a wink of an eye, and everybody likes it because it's kind of small. There's only a few people. Local faculty typically joins in, senior faculty from the hosting university. And there's a dinner the night before where we get to know each other. It's typically at a beautiful European city, so there's some activity outside of the university. And I did that one for many years, also, for my own enjoyment, because I got to learn so many different fields outside of microstructure, but in particular to let the younger ones inspire one another and have stronger networks in Europe, because I think that will help all of us. So the reproducibility, replicability debate is raging across all fields of science, including economics and finance. And one of my colleagues here at this university came up to me, Untitled, and asked me, look, we've done this beautiful project with a neuroscientist at Stanford, reading MRIs, and the zeal of the project, like the goal of the project was to, it was already exciting as it was, but the exciting element was to let multiple teams read those MRIs, test the same hypothesis on the MRI data that was produced in Tel Aviv, I think. Long story short, that got published in Science, and so they developed the infrastructure, and they wanted to do something similar in economics and be the first. And at first I said no. I mean, I loved when I read the article, I did read the article, I loved what they did, but I said no because it's, like I said earlier, it's copy-paste. I'm not so interested in copy-paste. We will find what you found in neuroscience, but I'd like to explore new things. And then he kept asking me about it, and somewhere a few weeks after a few weeks, I started thinking, it was summer, there was not much going on, there were not many people around, and I was walking around with this idea, but wait a minute, if it's so exciting to many people and landed at Science, could I enrich it in ways that would create novelty? And that's where I started the non-standard errors project with his team. And in a nutshell, what we did was, like they did with the MRI scans, we assembled a large database. At the time, I was talking to the German Stock Exchange. They have a stated objective to help scientists with data, but they never really produced any data, not a single data point for people to. And they were asking me, like, do you see ways in which we can be useful to you? I mean, not to me personally, but to you as a community. And then I thought, this is it. I have Utz asking about, let's let many researchers do the same thing essentially and see what variation we get across those researchers. And I have this beautiful data set. This is a way to get lots of people excited about this project, because this was German data. This was the equivalent of E-mini in Europe. So if you're a global investor, you want to have exposure to the European economy. You buy into, or you take a position in the Stocks 50 index futures. That's where all the activity is really in Europe. And not only would we get that data at a transaction level, we would know for every transactions, for both sides of the trade, if it was done for your own pocket or for your own accounts, or if it was done for clients. So there's this nice notion that you see what intermediaries are making and what the rest of the public. And as economists, we should care about what the rest, the end users, if they're getting what they want, and at what transaction costs. And so there were a lot of. I already got excited to do that analysis myself, but then I thought, no, let's do it. Let's bring that into that project. And so the basics of that project was to test a bunch of hypotheses, and for sake of illustration, let's think about transaction costs, or the bid-ask spread over 2 decades of trading this important project, and with all the innovations that have been going on, and there's a lot of press about electronic trading and different participants in the market, and different ways to organize the matching engine, different mechanisms. Anyway, it was a lot of changes over 2 decades, of the first 2 decades of this century actually. Did the transaction costs go down, or did they increase? And by how much? Was it 5% per year? Was it 4% per year? 6%? Was that an increase or a reduction? And so those are the simple questions that we asked people. Here's the data. Can you estimate, or make your best estimate of what the percentage annual change is in transaction costs? Lots of people signed up because they're excited about the project. 164 research teams, consisting mostly of 2 members. That was the maximum. So we're talking about a community of 350 plus researchers. They were all going to be co-author of the project. It was we sold it as crowd-based science, And this was so everybody felt like the excitement of being the first ones in economics in this major initiative, working with data that had never been released, and the focus was going to be the dispersion in estimates when all of these teams were doing the same task, essentially coming up with this estimate of percentage annual change in transaction costs. And now, what non-standard error is, because that's what the title is of the paper, is essentially the size of that dispersion. Because if you let 164 teams do that, and everybody comes out from somewhere in an interval between -6% and -4%, and a particular team has -5%, then sort of the dispersion very small. And for sake of this conversation, there's more to say to it, but let's define non-standard error as sort of the distance of that interval. It's more sophisticated, but I want to get the idea across. So if an estimate is -5% with a distance of 2% in this case, and a distance we call non-standard error, this is a pretty robust finding. We know its transaction costs have gone down by a significant amount. And so the way I'd like to think about this is the uncertainty driven by different researchers taking different research paths, make different choices at a variety of forks in the analysis path. And you have to think about, when you're given the data, you have to decide which of those data points am I going to use? What are the outliers? Which statistical model should I take? Which software package am I going to use, and what computer, et cetera, et cetera. And we know that all of those decisions matter, and probably lots of people take the same, go left at fork 5, but some go right, and probably some variation there. But the important thing is that all of these things add up, so they could create a lot of dispersion. So this interval might be large, and if that interval is large, the finding is not so robust. And we call it non-standard error with a wink to the idea of standard error, which we know is in our estimates because samples are finite, the sampling uncertainty. And so all of the econometrics, in a way, decades of econometric research has given us insight of the statistical uncertainty. But this is uncertainty coming from the fact that not all researchers agree on the analysis path. There is not a standard analysis path. And that's why we call this non-standard error. And it's a fundamentally different nature of uncertainty, because most of the studies we have in science, not in economics only, everywhere, there is a point estimate produced somewhere. But this is a single research team that took a particular path. So really we want to know that what is the non-standard error there? What are other reasonable paths, and what outcomes would they have yielded? And that's the non-standard error. And in the course of the project, I talked to Daniel Kahneman. Somehow, through one of the co-authors, we came across his book. Of course, people know about this book, but somebody suggested, really, you should reread the book, Noise, which is all about human judgment. And a lot of the book is about judges passing sentences on convicts. And it turns out there's a lot of dispersion across judges treating similar cases. And noise is then the dispersion across judges because different judges judge the same case different ways. And when we pitched this project and talked about non-standard errors, at some point, this was a Zoom call with the Kahneman lasting for about 1.5 hours. At some point he said, like, what this is that you guys did is diagnosing the level of noise in the scientific process. Because that's what they talk about in the book. Like you should do diagnostic analysis of the variation of in sentences passed by different judges, and they talk about this the measurement of noise in not only this case but different cases. And he said, like, this is what you guys did now for science. It's wonderful, and he got really excited about it. And then finally, so I started by saying I don't like copy paste. So the non-standard error is a term that we came up with, so that's kind of novel. But the dispersion in estimates across groups and reporting that was done in these other fields as well. It's called many analyst studies. The new thing is that we build in the quality component. So when I first heard about this result, I was not surprised. If you bring many teams in on a particular task, I bet you there's going to be quality differences across those teams. Not necessarily the quality of the team in terms of producing anything. It's the quality of the match of the team to the task. Okay, you could be a Nobel laureate in chemistry, but it'll be hard for you to do transaction cost analysis on German data, right? So not only do you need to have teams that are well trained to the task, but also fit to the task. And so I thought, when you bring many teams to a particular task, there's going to be heterogeneity across those teams. Some are better fit to the task than others. And so you will get outliers, not because all these paths are equally reasonable, is because some of these researchers took paths that others would not agree upon. Okay, so if you would cut out all the poor quality fits matches, maybe then what we're left with is very tight intervals or very low non-standard errors. So then we don't have to worry as much. Okay, so I wanted to strip out. I wanted quality to inform the analysis in the sense that let's try and really hard at removing the lower quality match teams and see if we still have that high dispersion. Another way of saying is, to what extent does quality drive non-standard errors? So we did that in a variety of ways. That was a big part of that project, and that was completely novel. And because the study was at least twice the size of the largest study thus far, with 164 teams, you need a lot of cross-section, a lot to measure this heterogeneity and to start, correlating quality to where the estimate of a particular team comes out relative to the median estimate. So I was excited about that. And the other thing, which is really important, I thought, is to finish it, because science doesn't end with a particular team analyzing the data, writing the report, and then putting it online. No, that's the start of it, because when we're at that stage, we start to get feedback, first from our colleagues with whom we talk over the coffee machine about the research, maybe at lunch. Then you send it to a conference like the European Finance Association meeting, what have you. You hopefully get to the program, you get a discussant, you get people in the audience to ask questions, they come at you during the, et cetera, et cetera. So you get feedback from peers. And you're incentivized to listen because you understand that lots of people know more than you do. And so you adjust your findings. Now we wanted to have, to measure that part of the process as well. So we wanted to see if we add, this had not been done before, so we're done with round 1 that I just described. Let's have round 2, 3, and 4. And round 2 would be that all of these teams would get, their reports would be sent to 2 really top people in the field. They would rate the report, but also give constructive feedback. This was a single blind review, so the evaluators would see who the team is, but not vice versa. And we told teams ex ante, so that incentivized them to do effort, because they knew that this, it's very likely that important people would participate. So I don't want to, come out as a fool in front of these people, seeing what I did with my report. And so you get that feedback from at least 2 peer evaluators. Now you don't need to change anything, because co-author you were. the moment you stepped into the project. It's not like we didn't go all the way to the reviewing process because you've got all kinds of other incentives to listen to referees more than you would like to. This was really, stay true to yourself. You want to find the optimal analysis path. And maybe you want to change it because some people pointed out some exits or some forks that you weren't aware of or that make sense F post. So you can change it, but you don't need to. And we were very clear about that right from the beginning. And people did change, not everybody, but people did change. And in the third round, we showed everybody what the top 5 papers were, and based on the average ratings. Also in our field, we tend to see more of the work that most people like, right? Very naturally, because at the conference, for example, you get to see the best papers, the ones that were selected by the program committee. And then finally, it was around like, okay, you can do it again, but now you don't have to upload your code, because that far we wanted you to write the report, but also give us your computer code that led to the report, because this was another dimension in our quality analysis. We wanted to test the code if we could run on a different computer in Paris, whether we could still be able to generate the same results. But the last stage, we didn't ask for that with the idea that maybe you were very charmed by a particular approach, but it was just beyond your capacities to code it yourself. And so you could, like in Bayesian updating, you could migrate your final estimate of the annual change in transaction costs completely to team number 3, who you thought was having a technology or an approach or an analysis path, I should say, that was far superior to yours. And so in the last step, you weren't constrained by uploading the code. And what turns out that we found some traction on the quality element. So we do see that quality co-varies with the distance a team is from the median. So that was the first stage. But it's somewhat disappointing in the economic side. So there's, even if you cut out all the low quality matches, you still get to sizable non-standard error. So it's not the point that it's not simply that you get the experts that are fit to the task to do the same task, and then you have 0 non-standard error or like negligible. It's still sizable. But the strongest result was in that convergence. So we have the dispersion coming down by 50%, like 50% over those 4 rounds, in a statistical significant way. And that's a really novel result of the paper. Anyway, so that was the non-standard error project. I have been in industry, so I know what it's like to be in industry. I can see there would be exciting jobs. If we wipe out academics from this moment, there's a lot of things that I'd be excited about doing, because a lot of smart people doing creative things in industry. But it's still your work. You need to get excited from either about the bottom end, essentially bottom line of the company, and not necessarily only be driven by your own intellectual curiosity. So that I think is really important, that you need to discover about yourself. That's what I tell my students and people that ask me that question. Early in the career, throw yourself into different things. If you're hesitating, spend some time in academia, spend some time in a corporate or a government. There's many other opportunities out there for people that want to contribute. And then you see, you come home from a week's work, spend the weekend, and you see, after all that energy I pumped into this, do I feel satisfied or do I feel like very tired? And I'm really not looking forward to the next week because I have to go back to the job. And there, you can think, about it and think about it and think about it. But the only way to experience is to throw yourself into it. And I found, I sort of can say this with some conviction because I've gone to industry and I've experienced it. I learned what I needed to learn, but I also learned that this wasn't for me. and this happens all the time. There is always a stage in a research trajectory where you simply you lose it. You get stuck. It doesn't work out, and it's particularly frustrating early in the career because you come from a situation attending all these classes that set you up in a particular context, whereas there is an itinerary that leads you to a particular theorem or a particular empirical result or a econometric model, and it always works. And then you start your own, and then you find out that typically it never works. And so you have to try many different things. And there's a lot of uncertainties on whether you get results at all when you start a particular research project. And that's if the expectations are not set properly, then there's disappointment all along, and then you get your reject. Even if you believe you found something, then you start submitting it to conferences like the European finance meetings or to journals, and you get rejected and again rejected, and you feel very, very discouraged. Now, for me personally, it was a tough time, particularly the first 5 years. I had trouble getting anything published. By tenure requirements at this university right now, I would not be here. They would have actually fired me because my first real solid, decent publications came after 8 years. And I was a little lucky also because microstructure was a mature field until we had new technology and electronic trading and high-frequency trading, and the whole world started to be interested in microstructure, particularly when it exploded with the book by Flash Boys by Michael Lewis. Late night shows were spending attention, and I was in pole position to ride that wave because I knew where to get the data, to analyze them, to talk to all these questions that were coming about. So I was somewhat lucky, but I also learned to let 1,000 flowers grow, because if you start a variety of projects, not too many, and you have in your mindset that some of these are not going to lead to any results, you try often enough, some will be successful, and that keeps you going. And that's what I learned myself. And you're asking like what on another level, on a day where you're kind of sad, or a week or a period, I started to appreciate life is, it sounds natural for financial economists, diversification, right? This is not only about your securities, this is about your life's activities. Don't put all your eggs in one bag. Yes, you can, of course, you need to spend a lot of time and effort if you want to be successful in finance. So it needs to be a big egg, but do plant other eggs. So have that. And what did I do? I don't know. Yoga I like to do. There's a period where I learned tango dancing. I think it's beautiful. Piazzolla's music, like the slow music, the atmosphere late in the day. You have a milonga, you meet different people. It was a beautiful way for me to relax. Reading novels is wonderful. Music, I was even, the worst guitar player in the world, but we had an adult class somewhere here in Amsterdam, Monday, starting 8:30, 8 adults, didn't even know how to hold the guitar, and there was a passionate instructor, and so you throw yourself into the world of music, but then you experience something. The experience of something's much richer if you try to do it yourself, and I'm actually still. I'm still a bad guitar player, but I have children now, and it's one of the richest experiences in my life when I get to sing a song on the guitar, play the chords, and then sing them with my kids. That's just wonderful. So you have to diversify your life. You have to find other things, because when your research is in a period where it's not so good, it's just statistics. So something will be good out there among the variety of things that you're doing.